guys, welcome to our new video in which we're gonna discuss what we've been up to in the past couple of weeks.
Yeah, so the past few weeks we've been learning Blender 3D modeling and augmented reality using Unity 3D, investigating some other libraries and SDKs and technologies even for augmented reality.
And the reason why we're doing that, because basically we're starting to create a game which would include AR and real life. So basically it's imagine a board game with real life figurines that combines basically AR and computer vision and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the theme for the game, like the visual theme, as you almost mentioned, is like a board game, so there's like not really a storyline yet. So the visual theme is steampunk. The reason we picked steampunk because it's really interesting. I don't know, like art, not paradigm, maybe just style or like aesthetic that we like. Personally, I like a lot because it's just interesting because it like points to period in like history in like late 19th century where there was already some innovation because of steam engines. So ships, trains, engines in general, factories powered by steam engines. Of course, guns like early electricity by Nikola Tesla and his crazy inventions like Tesla coil and things like that. So when you apply this to a game, you can still create like Tesla coil towers.
Or like lasers, basically.
Like almost like lasers or like Gatling guns that spin and shoot. But at the same time, it still has an interesting aesthetic. It's not as popular. It's like very, I don't know, like cartoonish almost.
And
yeah.
I like the bridge between like sci-fi and reality because when you see the steam engines and basically powering those massive air balloons, it kind of you start to feel like, oh, maybe it could be possible, but then it's sci-fi. It's not like just like, I don't know, cyberpunk where it's just completely sci-fi elements. So I'm just
it's interesting to see those illustration and books from the past, how people imagine the future. So instead of rockets, they imagined that they will travel to space or to moon using like giant cannons firing like metal balls with people inside them, or like submarines that could like, you know, go underwater for years, but they still had steam engines because they had some kind of steam engine modification because they didn't have like nuclear power.
It was the only technology they have at the time, so they kind of manipulated, I guess.
So just really, to me at this point, it's quite artistic almost because it's like it's pointless, but it's pretty because I don't know, like it's a form of technology, but which was cutting edge at some point, but it's not anymore. But it's just really nice.
I guess people back then they would try to imagine how they can push the boundaries with that specific technology. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
It's an interesting concept because it feels like technology can be like huge paradigm shifts and like jumps in technology, like internet, like electricity, that change everything so rapidly and such a different direction that your projection of the future is completely different than the reality. So maybe that will happen with our current lifetimes. Maybe the future that we imagine now will be completely different from the actual future. So that's like the long explanation why we picked steampunk as a theme.
Yeah. So that's about the theme. But basically in this video series, what we're going to do, we're going to take you on a journey on how we're going to build this game. Like what skills and what technologies we're going to use. And it's going to be challenging for us as, it's basically new grounds, and we'll have to learn a lot of new things basically.
As it stands today, like we already see that we'll need to learn, as we mentioned, 3D modeling, reality, but also marketing to sell the game, making the actual figurines, so building our own physical product, packaging of the board game, instructions, distribution, because it won't be drop shipping as our previous series. It will be real products that we'll have to like talk to suppliers and produce. It's like custom product from scratch, so there'll be a lot of learnings that we need to go through because, as Rūtenis mentioned, it'll be like real life connected to augmented reality. So you need to handle both parts, both technology and the physical part.
But the best part that is actually interesting to us and something close to us that we always wanted to try. Let's jump into it. we have split the topics into two parts. Basically, there's a Blender side and AR side. And Rūtenis was focusing on Blender objects, animations, and that kind of stuff. And I was looking into AR and connecting exported Blender models to it. So basically, Rūtenis will start about the Blender stuff.
Yeah, so Blender is a free software, open source software that I think everyone can download and create 3D objects. So not only for games, for anything. So architecture, like buildings, food, whatever, like marketing material.
I think you can even create 2D videos, actually.
Yeah, you can do animations, 2D videos. Like it's just a very flexible platform to create objects, basically. But it's well suited for games because, like we'll talk later, but you can apply textures, you can apply, like shapes and like different tools that are like very well like thought out, so you don't need to like reinvent the wheel when you make your own models. So the first model I made is a steampunk airship. The way I started this model is just by drawing a sketch on piece of paper, and after that I took a photo of it and just added it to Figma. Figma is also a free software tool that you can create 2D objects for design, for marketing material as well.
It's getting popular, basically.
It's very popular. It's like similar to Adobe Illustrator.
But just free.
Free, and in my opinion, better. It's also very collaborative. But yeah, there's like a free Figma plugin that allows you to convert images to SVG files that are scalable. So I converted it to SVG file, which is like easily scalable up and down in size, and I exported it to Blender. So you can see it looks like a sketch almost, or not like a sketch, like a blueprint that I used as a reference. So after I had this reference, I just used cubes to like build out the shape from the side, looking from the side view. And yeah, so it was very crude model because it was my first model. Like I didn't know how to cut shapes yet using dissect tool, or like how to bend shapes, how to reverse shapes, so you could have, for instance, one side, make it really nice, and do the inverted side, which is also symmetrical, but it's the opposite. So all these tools I mentioned, will add a link to a YouTube playlist of tutorials of people who can explain it really well. And if you're interested, you can always check it out.
Just one quick question, like to be fair, I think the approach that you took, like drawing a sketch, then turning into Blender, like I think it's quite interesting way to do that. Like I don't see many, like where did you find it?
Yeah, that's a good question. The reason I did it because I thought it would be easier to get like a baseline inspiration out of my hand easier because it's not like an image that you're inspired by, because then it's like really easy to just follow and create a model or a photo that already exists. So I thought if I add this layer of drawing it with my hand, and I'm not that good at drawing at all, so I thought like maybe it will be like an interesting layer to like start by drawing, not by creating 3D model. Also, it made it more simple to like create the shape, but at the same time, it's good that you asked, because I realized that drawing a shape is like it's not very symmetrical because you draw it by hand, and I found later that it's much easier to actually
just with Blender.
use Blender, but like measure everything. So I'll add another example of a defensive wall that I built, and it uses like 10 by 10 scale at the bottom. So 10 on axis and y axis. So that way, when you create like the actual wall, the supporting section of the wall, it's all measured in increments. So 1, 0.5 and 0.25, and this way you can easily position those parts, because you know that this part takes one block, this takes half of block, this takes a quarter of a block.
So it's kind of a system.
Yeah. So coming back to your question, like if you don't have that, if you have a drawing, then it's really hard to apply this grid because it's drawn by hand. Maybe you could use like a architecture paper with a grid and then scale it to a grid in Blender, but at that point, like I don't know if there's much point,
So would you recommend that approach? Like is it good for like brainstorming? Like is it not like maybe it's just nice to kind of see a sketch on the paper and then transform
I definitely would recommend it for creativity and generating ideas, but the actual process of converting this model the marginal gain you get from this like preview, like it's not that big. Like you could probably do it without it in your mind. But like it's really good to generate ideas because you're not constrained by actually making the model. You can just draw it and then build it. So you can have like 10 different variations very quickly and then decide on the best one and create a model of it. But this idea of actually putting block by block through a drawing, it looks fancy, but I'm not sure if there's much benefit.
I think it's a cool idea basically. And I guess in the beginning, if you're not comfortable yet, you can build, like I guess in the future, when you're comfortable with Blender, building like 10 sketches in Blender wouldn't take that long. But in the beginning, I guess it's nice to kind of brainstorm in your head because you're not really familiar with the tool yet. So I like that concept that you did. So that was one of the reasons. But as I mentioned before, like after making the ship, I realized how complex and large it is because if you don't make the detailed parts, it will look very crude and like basically like 2000, not even 2000, maybe like mid 90s game, very like low poly. So I realized that to make objects more detailed, I need to learn how to make better shapes. And so I picked a smaller object. It's like a body of a female with a mask attached. And where did you find it? Like
it's heavily inspired by the actual drawing came from Depeche Mode concert artwork made by a Danish artist, Anton Corbijn. So there's like moving decorations as well. We can upload the video, but I was really fascinated by these shapes and the color scheme because this is probably like a fan art. This is not the actual image, but this purple blue with blood red, like it's like an interesting contrast between colors. And I just wanted to make the actual mask. Like you can see in the model, it's quite edgy in terms of like it's not very round because it's not supposed to look like an actual bird head. It's like a mask. So I took a lot of time to just make this model instead of making the whole ship. By making that, I learned like joining objects, like mirroring objects, things like that to make it symmetrical. So I think it's also a good way when you start learning to
copying something basically, kind of getting some inspiration and just trying to replicate it.
And also starting with small objects, but I like this flow of like creating a large object that you're inspired by, like a steampunk ship, but then like going into detail creating like a small bird. Maybe I'll use this bird decoration like a scaled down version, or look at the side of the ship, just like almost like an image, just a decoration. Maybe I won't use it at all, but the point is that it's really hard to make large detailed models. So that was one of the things. The other thing I learned is that you need to center your objects on X and Y axis at 0, because in the beginning I was just dragging everything around, and when you try to make it more detailed, it like over time as you add more and more meshes to this scene, it takes a lot of time to align your cube or like a new object to your original object because it's far away from the 0 point. Because
and there's a lot of axes flying around.
So and also there are some commands that allow you to center everything to the center point. So it's better to create a new separate scene, create that small object, center everything on 0, and like when you add a new mesh, just zero it out, drag it into your position of the model, save this whole model and import it into another scene, than to have like many different objects and try to align them, because then you just waste a lot of time trying to align everything perfectly. So another thing I learned is integrating Sketchfab, which is like a third-party library, into Blender. There's a plugin that allows you to add like a button directly into your Blender instance, and then it's like you just copy the link of Sketchfab of the model you like, and it will import it directly to your scene with textures and everything. The only thing I would say by using a third-party library or like models, you need to customize them. You can see in this example of the ship, I made it more like brass colored and like brown instead of red and black how it was originally.
So for example, when you import that external model, can you manipulate the specific parts, or is it like grouped and you can?
It's just a Blender model. It depends on the quality of the model, but some models are just as good as your own model.
So you can just manipulate how.
I'll add another example of defensive wall. It's like an anti-tank structure for a wall that I also used. So yeah, with Hieronymus, we had discussion initially with that, like before we even started using Blender, like should we just buy a sample pack or should we create our own models? Because it might take so much time to build models. Currently, what I would say the best solution is, given the time we have, is to create the large and creative parts ourselves of the model. So like maybe steampunk ship with like a, I don't know, like a Gatling gun tower defense structure, like to create your own ideas. But for small details, maybe like some part of like technical engine part of like a steam engine, or like shells of a gun, like don't waste time making those, because those are generic like objects.
And I guess this question, because we will be actually printing these figures.
Yeah.
So it might be not, we might not even use, like for example, you mentioned a shell of a gun, like a bullet, like we won't even, I guess, use it because it's just too small. So I guess the bigger and
definitely will be like we'll need to establish like almost like an agile process that we use in web development to like move from idea design to release, or in development then release, and the checking, not having like a waterfall structure where you work for 10 months and then release,
because we don't even know the limitations yet. So it's kind of really hard to set specific structure, as we don't even know on what kind of models we focus, because we don't know what models AR will support even. So we're just kind of exploring everything and just trying to understand this whole, I guess, environment and the whole ecosystem, how it's even working. So we're just experimenting basically.
Just experimenting and see what's the most optimal way given the time, and like where we should put the focus. Like as you always mentioned, maybe like those objects won't be even visible, but at the same time we would like to have detailed objects and see how far we can go. How far we push augmented reality. We don't want to make a game that like looks completely unrealistic. It doesn't have to look like a AAA game on your gaming PC, but it's also should have some detail, So, and the last part I learned, or like thing that I explored, was textures. Exploring textures, so like coloring your meshes, like squares, like whatever your shapes, adding color to them, or patterns. So I found some websites. I'll add a resource sheet to this video as well. There are some really good textures that are free, some websites, some open source projects that you can use. There's a shader tool. So basically there's two ways to add textures to Blender. So shader tool and just regular image background. So at the beginning for the ship model I used the image background, but then I found limitations because when you try to make the texture more customized or more suited for this shape, because you have to remember that textures at the end of the day are just images. So for certain shape size, they can get stretched out. So you should use shader tool for that. At least that's what I found useful, because there's like a mapping section that you can use and have different mapping based on shape size. So you can change Y and X axis based on the shape you need.
And by the way, how the textures are created? Like, are they actually doing it by pixel, or is like a scan of real object? Like how? I
guess with a combination of two. For me, I actually even tried to. I can upload the photo as well, because I tried walking around and taking a photo of defensive wall of the castle we live nearby, and like cutting it out and using it as a texture. But the density was just not there of the photo, because like I took it from quite far away, so maybe it's quite low quality. But I guess you need to. So you need to be very good at it's like a separate skill, I would say, creating textures, because those textures take like 27 megabytes in size, so they're really large. So imagine an image of this size, so they're really dense. I'm not sure, maybe, I think it's a combination of combining images and some Photoshop maybe to create.
I guess it depends on the art style as well. Like, we have more realistic games like Battlefield, for example, Call of Duty, but there's also like Valheim, which is like more, I don't know,
low poly,
like not like I guess more like pixelated and more drawn by hand. And then we have like games like Fortnite, which is purely kind of animated. I guess it's just so it's interesting. I guess we'll see how we're gonna handle textures.
Texture is like there's a separate topic. So definitely need to explore more of that.
One thing with textures is that we will have real life figurines, as we mentioned. So I guess they won't need textures because they will be printed. Like, I guess they will just follow one mass. Like, we won't be actually painting them. So I guess the texture really matter on the actual.
So we won't have colors on models?
I don't know. We'll explore that, I guess.
Because that would look boring. Like imagining the board game with no colors.
Like I guess we can have colors, but imagine having texture. You know, I don't think it's gonna be texture.
Texture. You mean like 3D texture?
Yeah, like you see this wall, like it won't have that actual texture. It was just like color. If you get
maybe it's like more like a pattern.
So again, that's an interesting challenge as well. Like, you know, so
yeah, so definitely it's like going from an idea to creating both digital part and physical part at the same time. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
So I think these are all points. As I mentioned, I'll include resources for models, textures, and tutorials that I watched or found into the description.